Good morning. This is Ken Hers. I'm the clerk of the U.S. Bankruptcy Court for the Northern District of Ohio in Cleveland. And I'm here joined by John Horner, the former bankruptcy clerk for the Western District of Pennsylvania and our former president of NCBC. And John, I thank you for joining us today.
You're welcome, Ken, and I thank you for driving to Pittsburgh today. It's a very rainy day here in Pittsburgh. We thought we'd beat the snow, but we didn't think about the rain. So thank you for coming today to visit with me, Ken.
Well, John, this interview is an attempt to get at the historical value of your history with the courts, your history with NCBC, and particularly in your term as president. So could you just begin with giving us a synopsis of your career with the courts, when you began service, what other positions you may have held?
Okay, well, going back even a little further, I received a law degree and a master's in business administration from the University of Pittsburgh. And before coming to the courts, I was a law clerk for two local court judges. It's called the Common Pleas Court here in Pennsylvania. It's the state court system. And I was also in private practice for a few years. And my first contact with bankruptcy court actually came as a litigant or representing a litigant as counsel in bankruptcy hearings. I actually wanted to find a position where I could combine my legal background along with my business background, and I saw a career with the courts as something that gave me that opportunity. It's something I enjoy doing, using both the legal and the business background or knowledge that I had, and it always came in use in the courts. I actually started with the court in December of 1986. I was selected as the chief deputy clerk, and I served in that position for 20 years. And then I was actually appointed clerk back in 2007. And I served as the clerk until January 2014. And that I was actually serving as the president of the NCBC at the time of my retirement. Of course, when I retired, I also resigned that position at that time.
Well, when did you become a member of NCBC, and why did you decide to join?
You know, that's sort of interesting. I can't even remember when I joined. We're talking about the early 1990s.
Yeah.
And I would hear about the NCBC, but the clerk in my office wasn't a member. There were no members in the office, so I really didn't know that much about it. I started to learn more about it probably at the clerk chief deputy conferences. It sounded like a great organization. It was, even at that time, not knowing much about it, I could see that it was really the only organization whose sole purpose was to serve the clerks and deputy clerks in the bankruptcy system. So I just sort of joined. It was, I forget, $10 or $15 at the time. I joined just to get an idea of what they did, basically. And back then, Mary Weibel was the president, and or actually, I think she was the editor of the newspaper at that time, and we'd actually get paper copies mailed out to us from time to time, and that's how we sort of kept up on things before the internet and all these other modern conveniences. And so, you know, for several years, I was the only member of the NCBC in the office, and I actually talked to the clerk, and even though he wasn't a member, he was supportive in my efforts to start talking about the NCBC to the staff members. And so it grew just from me to the point when I retired. Just about every year we had over 50% membership in the NCBC, which I was always very proud of, that, you know, our group in Western Pennsylvania got on board and really supported the organization.
Did you hold other offices prior to becoming president-elect and president of NCBC?
Yes. I was a board member in 1998 to 2000, and then I also became a board member again in 2008 to 2010. And the first time I was on the board, I was part of the educational committee at one point in time, and I enjoyed my time both times as a board member. In 2008, Ken, when I ran in 2008 for the board again, I had run in 2007 unsuccessfully, and at that time, I think it was 12 people were running for the board that year, and they had 2 or 3 openings. So I wasn't surprised that I didn't become a board member that year, but it also struck me there were a lot of people that wanted to be involved with the NCBC, and there wasn't really an outlet for these people to use their energies and their talents to help the organization, except for the committee work, and that was limited. So when I ran in 2008, typically when I would run for these type of offices, I give a short explanation of my background. But I may have been the first person to ever have a platform running, and I suggested that what the NCBC needed to do was have circuit liaisons and local representatives, because it would be an opportunity for more people to get involved with the organization, and it also would lend a lot more support to the NCBC. And then in 2008, as I said, I was fortunate enough to be elected to the board. I was also fortunate enough, Ken, that you were the vice president or president-elect at that time, and also chair of the membership committee, because you supported that idea. You took the ball and ran with it, and I didn't take the phone off the hook.
Okay.
But you ran with that idea at the time, and you also appointed me as a member of the membership committee. And I think really mainly due to your efforts and with some help from the rest of us on the membership group, we really started to expand. We developed the circuit liaison structure, the local representatives came on board, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, but I think over the next 3 or 4 years we probably doubled our membership, having all these folks helping so at the grassroots level, so to speak, working with the NCBC. So Ken, I think that's one of the best things I did in my time with the NCBC, and I'd like to thank you because you really took the ball, as I said, and got us moving in that direction back in 2008. And I think it's still a benefit to this day to the organization.
It is.
Yes.
Yeah,
And,
thank you, John.
And then, you're very welcome. You deserve all the accolades.
Oh, no.
And then in 2010, I ran as president-elect and was elected, and I served in that position for 2 years, and then I served as president after that 2-year period. And as president, there were a lot of things going on for the year I was president. And if it's all right, I'll just talk about those right now.
Please do.
The first item that came up during that time was the General Accounting Office had contacted some of the courts. A congresswoman had asked that a study be done to determine whether or not consolidation of the district and bankruptcy courts would be feasible at that point in time. And we heard about the study. Some of the bankruptcy courts have been contacted. And at that point in time, I thought we really needed to have a voice as the National Conference of Bankruptcy Clerks. We needed to be able to have some input into that whole study and the decision-making process that might go into the results of the study. So I contacted the person at the GAO who was in charge of the study, and they were very amenable to having the NCBC involved. They sent us a set of questions to answer, and at the time I thought this issue was so important to the courts. I wanted the board, of course, to have input into it, but I also decided to create a committee of past presidents that would also help us in developing our answers to those questions. And what that did was it brought in a number of people who not only had been past presidents, excuse me, they also had experience with issues about consolidation in the past. They knew how the government worked. They knew how the administrative office and the judicial conference worked. And they brought in a wealth of knowledge that not only I and the officers, but also the board were able to use in developing the answers to the GAO study. And that study came out the way we were hoping it would come out. They had no clear preference that consolidation would be a better course of action, which was really a benefit to the bankruptcy courts at that time. I also had the past president committee involved with a set of questions that the National Conference of Bankruptcy Judges had been developing, a questionnaire they were going to send out to district and bankruptcy courts. And again, it gave us a chance to have input into the structure and the way questions were drafted for this questionnaire that went out to the courts that was going to be used by the NCBJ. They used some of our ideas, but of course they had their own ideas also, which we could all certainly appreciate. So that was another area that I thought was very important during my time as president, where we had a say. Another area that was also important, we did a lot in 1 year, I think. The Judicial Conference, one of their committees, I believe it was the Committee on the Administration of the Courts, they made a proposal to the Executive Committee of the Judicial Conference of the United States Courts that court funds could not be used to send court employees to educational meetings or conferences that were being sponsored by private organizations. And of course, the National Conference of Bankruptcy Clerks was a private organization. We, of course, we being the bankruptcy community in general, but certainly the officers and board of the NCBC in particular, were very concerned because typically recommendations made to the Judicial Conference are approved, and it would have been very difficult to maintain our registration levels for the annual conference if the bankruptcy courts weren't able to help sponsor some of their employees to attending the conference each year. So we saw this as a big issue that we needed to somehow address. There's no mechanism really for individuals, even within the courts, to address the executive committee. So we worked along with the Federal Court Clerks Administration Association, the FCAA or FCCA, to try to get our point of view and our concerns heard by members of the executive committee. And that took a little bit of work, but we developed our points and got our message across. And I thought we were very fortunate. The executive committee actually decided to not approve that recommendation, which was unusual in itself. And I thought it was a great victory for both the FCCA and the NCBC. So those were some of the big issues we had to tackle while I was the president.
Yeah, you remind me of how much went on in that 1 year. That
Yes.
was a lot. It was a lot to grapple.
And we were very successful. And again, I have to thank the members of the board, the other officers, and the past presidents. I don't know. We needed the input of all these people in order to really get our point heard. And I was always so thankful that we were so successful in all those areas at the time.
Mm-hmm.
Of course, it's always a continuing type of a thing where you always have to be out there, and I'm sure many of these issues are going to rise again. So.
True. So do you think the NCBC is a viable representative of the interests of the bankruptcy community, and how do you think it can better serve the needs of the bankruptcy employees?
Okay. On my time on the board and as an officer, I often saw that the NCBC is really the only organization that doesn't have, it's not pulled in different directions. It has one clear goal, and that's to represent people working in the bankruptcy courts. And I think it's the only voice we have sometimes, from what I could see. I was also on different committees at the administrative office. And, the people that work at the administrative office have a tough job because there's a pie that has to be cut, and it can only be cut. It's only so big, and it has to be cut up to serve a number of different organizations. And the Judicial Conference, as well as the AO, has a tough job. And, they have to be fair to all the organizations. The NCBC at times is the only person that can say, or the only organization that can really speak up for the bankruptcy court sometime and say, this is what we need, and we understand the constraints you work under, but this is what we have. I know the clerks, the bankruptcy clerks group also is a strong advocate, but I think at times we being the NCBC, don't have the constraints of having to work within a system. We can come in and just present our own point of view at times, and I think that's very important. The only area that I think the NCBC might be able to help our members in other areas is perhaps making more use of social media. That a lot of it really wasn't even out there when I joined the board in 2008. Things have changed so much in 7 years. And I'm thinking if we could perhaps do more educational type of conferences, maybe podcasts, or maybe just streaming video, because it might get more difficult for people to go to the annual conference, which I think has been a tremendous way for many staff members to receive added training, knowledge over the years that they otherwise couldn't get. But I'm thinking maybe if we could use social media and even our own website to do some more education-based type things, or maybe even just to keep the people, our members involved in more ways than just the newsletter. Because it seems like what I'm reading, more people like to look at videos now than actually to sit down and read a newsletter. So that might be a way to reach our younger members too.
Good. Thanks, John.
Okay.
That pretty much exhausts my questions. Is there anything else you'd like to add, or something you haven't mentioned yet that would embellish your 27-year career and your time with the NCBC board?
No, I'd just like to say I really enjoyed working in the bankruptcy courts and working with other people in the NCBC over the years. Not just when I was on the board, but I also was on different committees when I wasn't a board member or an officer, and I always enjoyed my time with the NCBC and my time with the courts. And the one thing I do miss in retirement is my interaction with the people that I met over the years and became friends with, and I'm still are friends with in the courts. So that's something I do miss. I think the bankruptcy courts have always strived, and the clerk's offices have always strived to do the best for the public. And I was very proud to be part of the federal judiciary and the National Conference of Bankruptcy Clerks. So once again, Ken, thanks for coming today to speak with me.
And thanks for joining us, John, and appreciate all your insights, and good luck to you in your retirement.
All right, thank you.
Take care.